Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. We are in our second class in our series on creation versus evolution. This class is targeted primarily for the ninth and 10th grade class at Pepper Road Church of Christ, but it is open to anybody and everybody who would like to view it and study the things that we have to say. And it is my hope that each of you will take to heart the things that we study, and that this will pique your interest in further study, and that you will want to go ahead and pursue this even more. And just know that the things that we study, if you study any science at all, your faith will be bolstered. It will be uh, it will be confirmed because that is the way God created things. So I'm excited about this study and grateful to have the opportunity to study with you and to lead this conversation. And if you have any questions at all, or any comments or critiques, any disagreements at all, please don't hesitate to contact me and we will take up that study and we'll talk about it. And let us reason together. We are studying from Joshua Gertler's book entitled Unraveling Evolution. Joshua Gertler is a Christian. He is a creationist, of course, but he teaches this from a Christian standpoint, and I think that's very important. And because it helps us to know that the things that he teaches are not coming from any kind of a denominational viewpoint. Now, I just do want to point out that when we go into the lessons, we are not going to go through the lesson in detail. We're not going to cover everything that is found in each of these lessons. There's a lot of really, really good material in these lessons. And I hope that you will read through the lessons and answer the questions at the end of each lesson so that you will have a better understanding of the subject matter. But what I present in my lessons will cover some of those points that are mentioned in the lesson, but we will also bring in some additional information that will hopefully enhance your understanding of the subject matter. As I said, we are using the revised second edition of this book as opposed to the older version. This is the original version of Unraveling Evolution. And if you have this book and you try to follow it, it'll be a little bit harder because the page numbers don't match up. So I urge you to get this version of the book. I tried to get one to everybody in the 9th and 10th grade classes, but if you have not received yours, please let me know, or let one of the elders know, or Matt Davis, or any of the men, and we'll see that we get you a copy of the book. And as I mentioned last week, we are also looking at this book a little bit, Michael Denton's book, Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. We're going to be talking about this book, some of the quotes from the book today. But this is just one of many books. Michael Denton is one of many evolutionists who has come to realize that Darwinian evolution, even neo-Darwinian evolution, is on shaky legs, it's on sinking sand, and it's about ready to collapse if it hasn't already collapsed. But they're trying to prop it up for all they can, for all they're worth. But if you will notice in this lesson, lesson 3 in the book, lesson 3 in the book, um, lesson 3 on pages 25 through 37, there are many quotes from different evolutionists who have turned their backs on Darwinian evolution and are seeking for something that makes more sense. They're not going to leave evolution apparently, but um, they are coming to the realization that Darwinian evolution doesn't work and cannot work. Even neo-Darwinian evolution just doesn't work. In fact, I have this book, and I will be using it somewhat myself. It's entitled That Their Words May Be Used Against Them. This book is a huge book. As you can see, it is over 475 pages of quotes from evolutionists, where I mean, this is just a treasure trove of quotes showing that they don't know what they're doing sometimes. They think they do, they act like they do, but what they have written and what they have said shows that they are groping, they are searching for answers, but not going to give up evolution. And we'll talk about that to some extent in the rest of this quarter. I have so many fun and exciting things to talk to you about as we go forward, and just looking forward to it. So, with that, we will get on with it. As we talked about last week, we are in lesson 3, and I hope to finish that up in this class. And then we'll go into lesson 6 through 8. We're going to defeat some of the other neo-Darwinian dogmas. Then we'll look at fossils in the geologic column. And then we'll look at something that they've created, since they know that Darwinian evolution will not work and it's full of holes. They've created something called punctuated equilibria. And so we're gonna poke a few holes in that as well. And then we're going to look at evidence of Noah's flood. There is a tremendous amount of evidence everywhere we look. And so we're going to look at some of those evidences. We're going to talk about ape-man question. Did we descend from apes? And then we're going to jump back to lesson 4 and look at theistic evolution and show that even people who say they believe in God but want to throw evolution in there somewhere, that won't work either. It's either you believe in all of what God says or you don't believe God. So with that, I forgot to mention, after we finish this book, lessons 3 through 12, then for the last few classes, we will study the ultimate proof of creation. As I said, that's a kind of a bold title, a bold statement, but we will study that in some depth and show that there is a proof of evolution that, not that it will convince everybody, but they won't have a logical and rational response to it. So with that, we will go into our lesson today. We're talking about origins. This is kind of an introduction to origins. As you know, there are 2 models of origins, and it's kind of in the title of our class, creation versus evolution. So evolution, let's talk about that. What is it? Well, it's defined, at least one man's definition, on page 27 in the book. John G. Williams quote. He said, evolution is the hypothesis. Okay, now there, right there, I am not transition, excuse me. The hypothesis. We talked about last week that evolution is a hypothesis. It is not a theory. In order to make it to the level of theory, it would have to be proven over and over in the lab by scientific experimentation. But you cannot prove it. So therefore, it is never left the level of hypothesis. So at least this guy recognizes that. And he says that evolution is the hypothesis that millions of years ago, lifeless matter acted upon by natural forces gave origin to minute living organisms, which have since produced all extinct and living plants and animals, including man. So we learn in this quote that not only did we descend from apes, supposedly, but we descended from lifeless matter, a primordial soup, just pond scum. That's what you came from. And somehow life came from non-life, and it evolved into everything you see. So evolution is godless, it is random, it is self-driven, it is self-sustaining, and very importantly, it is purposeless. It has no purpose to it at all. There's no mind behind it, driving it. It has no goal and no purpose at all. But from that godless, random, mindless, purposeless process, man evolved. Man with intelligence and emotion and love and the ability to engage in abstract thought and the ability to engage in technology and engineering and medicine and all of the things that we just take for granted because we see them and study them and think about them all the time. But you ever think about the fact that all of those things evolved from nothing but pond scum? So that is the evolution model. Man is an accident of nature. You're no more important than a rat or a snail. If so, why? If we all evolved from the same thing, why am I more important than a snail? Life is meaningless. My life is meaningless if I evolve from nothing, from just garbage, you might say. Theodosius Dobzhansky, and I use this quote just because I like to say his name, this guy says, in giving rise to man, the evolutionary process has, for the first and only time, become conscious of itself. So this evolutionary process has conscience. It is conscious, and it has evolved consciousness. Michael Denton, in this book, Evolution, a Theory in Crisis, as we mentioned before, evolution is analogous to problem solving by trial and error. It leads to the immense claim that all the design in the biosphere is ultimately the fortuitous outcome of an entirely blind, random process, a giant lottery. Now remember this, Michael Denton, he is an evolutionist. So that is his definition of what evolution is. All right, so that's one model. The other model is creation. And this model says that everything was created by the one true, all-powerful God. There is evidence of purpose and design in everything we see. Because God designed, there's going to be design in everything we see. And because God had a purpose for his creation, we're going to be able to see purpose. It's not just things that just have no reason to exist. There is purpose in all that we see. And finally, we see that man is the pinnacle of God's creation, the crowning achievement of God's creation. Everything was created leading up to man, and everything was created for man. And man is therefore responsible to his creator. We are created by a loving and forgiving God, but also one who demands justice and has laws, and we have responsibilities to him because he created us. And this next quote, is from a Harvard professor. Now, by the way, this Harvard professor lived 150 years ago. But look at what he said. This is Louis Agassiz. He said, the living world shows premeditation, wisdom, greatness, prescience, that is knowing before, omniscience, that is knowing all. And the living world proclaims aloud the one God whom man may know. And natural history must, in good time, become the analysis of the thoughts of the creator of the universe. Like I said, Harvard, 150 years ago, if a Harvard professor said that today, he would be tossed out on his ear. That kind of talk would not be allowed in the greater institutions of higher learning, such as Ivy League schools like Harvard. So those are the two models, evolution and creation. So briefly to talk about evolution, evolution is unproven and it is unprovable. It is unprovable because you can never actually create a living thing from lifeless matter. And scientists, with all of their knowledge and all of their concerted effort, and I mean many, many scientists putting all of their thoughts and efforts toward this end, and with almost unlimited funds from the government and from the schools, have never been able to synthesize life from lifeless matter. But it happened accidentally, with no mind and no power and no technology to guide it or to synthesize it or to make it happen. They can't even make a living cell out of lifeless matter, but I'll even give them a head start. Let's say we take a dead body, a person, a human dead body that's only been dead a few hours, and there you've got a brain, you've got lungs, you've got a heart, you've got all of the other organs necessary to life, and even blood still left in the system. Bring life to that. You've got everything you need. They cannot bring life to that because they don't understand life. As we sing in the third stanza of Our God, He is Alive, secure is life from mortal mind. God holds the germ within His hand. Though men may search, they cannot find, for God alone does understand. Our God, He is alive. They don't understand life. Life is an enigma, a puzzle, a mystery, and that's the way God made it. We have to have faith in God because He created life, and we need to leave it at that. Well, evolution is, if it's happening at all, it's happening too slowly to observe, and that's by design. In other words, Darwin attached millions of years to his evolution theory and said, given enough time, we can do anything, or evolution can do anything. So by doing that, he made it unfalsifiable. Remember last week we talked about a theory. In order to become a theory, a hypothesis has to be falsifiable. That is, you have to be able to experiment and test it in the laboratory. Well, evolution will never be a theory because it is not testable. It's not provable. It's not falsifiable because it's happening so slowly, according to them. Now, that may not surprise you that evolution is unproven and unprovable, but this might surprise you. Creation is unproven and unprovable. Now, I'm talking about scientifically. It cannot be proven because if creation is true, it occurred in the distant past. It was not observed by humans, and it is not repeatable by scientific experimentation. So you can't even say there is a theory of creation because it is, at least scientifically, because it cannot be tested in the laboratory. It cannot be falsified by test and examination or experimentation. So science cannot test and prove whether creation is true or not. Okay, we cannot prove evolution. We cannot disprove it. Same thing goes for creation. But their predictions can be tested. If you have a model of origins, whether it's evolution or creation, that model is necessarily going to bring with it certain predictions. In other words, if your model is true, we should expect to see X, because it predicts that certain things are going to be true. Are the predictions of your model consistent with the facts? I'll give you just one example. Evolution. Remember, evolution says that things evolve slowly over a long period of time. All the animals in the universe, both extinct and extant, that is present, have evolved very slowly over a long period of time. Well, if that's true, there should be many fine gradations among all of these animal types. For instance, Canidae and Felidae, that is the dog type. Canidae is the dog type, which includes the common family dog, as well as the wolf and the jackal. But the Felidae includes all the cats, like the domestic cats and the lions and tigers and the large cats. Why is there no kind of dog cat, half dog, half cat? Or there should be many fine gradations between them. You might have heard of the term missing link. There's no missing link. There are hundreds and thousands, maybe millions, of missing links. There should be many fine gradations, and this was recognized by Darwin himself. In his book, The Origin of Species, he lamented this: why is not every geological formation charged with such links? And he's talking about the links between living and extinct inhabitants of the world. Why are the geologic columns just not full of such links? Why does not every collection of fossil remains afford plain evidence of the gradation and mutation of the forms of life? Although geological research has undoubtedly revealed the former existence of many links, bringing numerous forms of life much closer together, and by the way, we will examine that statement in some detail, not in this class, but in coming classes. He says there are some links between one form and another form, but we're going to debunk that. I'll give you a little hint. Although geological research has undoubtedly revealed the former existence of many links, bringing numerous forms of life much closer together, it does not yield the infinitely many fine gradations between the past and present species required on this theory. And this is the most obvious of the many objections which may be urged against it. Darwin knew he had a major problem, and that was that there are, at his time, he thought, very few links between the types, the forms of the different families and genuses of genera of animals. But it turns out that there are even fewer now than there were when Darwin wrote his book, because many of those have been discounted. But he realized that this was a problem. There should be just no break between one form of animal and another form of animal. But there's nothing in between. There should be many fine gradations. Think of a gradation like fading to black. Let's say you have on a video screen, you have white over here, and then it slowly fades to black. That is a gradation. There are many grades or many stages or degrees, many successive changes in between. So Darwin recognized that there should be, but there are not, these many fine gradations between these forms of animals. Creation has a prediction also. Creation, if it is true, its prediction is that there would be separate and distinct classification, because God made every kind of animal, and he said they will reproduce after their kind, not going into some other kind, not fading into, not changing into, not grading into another kind. But we find that there are separate and distinct classification. And that's why we can separate them into kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Because that's the way God created. And there are limitations. There are limits beyond which these kinds cannot go. Yes, there is evolution. We're going to talk about that. But not the kind of evolution that was envisaged by Darwin. Creatures that defy evolution. I'm going to tell you now, we're going to be studying some amazing animals, and these are going to just pop up when you least expect them, and they defy evolutionary explanation. Uh, they'll just come when you without warning. They'll just come randomly, just in some classes, not every class, but you just never know when they'll come. They'll be kind of like Barney Fife's gun. It'll just fire at any time. So some of you ninth and 10th graders may not get that reference, but we're just going to be talking about some of the features of God's creation, animals that defy any kind of evolutionary explanation. So this one's going to be a fun one. Let's talk about first of all, the standard evolutionary sequence. That is, going from the pond scum to man. All right. Well, part of that sequence included fish, evolved into amphibians, which evolved into reptiles, which evolved into birds. So that's the standard evolutionary sequence for at least this section of evolution. But we're going to be talking about just one transition, that is from reptiles to birds. And in one particular aspect of that transition, we're going to be talking about respiration. How do birds breathe? Well, this is a reptile lung. Well, not really, but it is a very rough depiction of a reptile lung. And if you can see here, if I can get my mouse going, we see these arrows here that show air going into the lungs, going into the bronchi and then the alveoli, and then air going out the same way. Air goes in, and it does what it's supposed to do, but then the air is used up, and then the stale air is exhaled. Air goes in, air goes out. So you might think of this like a bottle. If you want to put water in a bottle, it's got to go in through the top. But if you want the water to come out of the bottle, it's got to go out the same way that it came in. We might call this the dead end lung. Now, dead end is not a bad thing. I mean, this is what our lungs are like and what every other type of animal is like that has lungs other than birds. It's the dead end. It breathes in to the lung and exhales out the same way that it went in. Bird lungs, on the other hand, look more like this. A bird lung, you have air going into the parabronchi, but it goes out a different way. In one way, out another way. So this would be, as opposed to this, which acts more like a bottle that water goes in and out the same way, this is more like a hose, a water hose, where water comes in one way and goes out the other way. So this would be something like a throughput lung as opposed to a dead end lung. Air comes in and then goes out a different way. Now, when I'm talking about air going out or in and out a different way, it does go in and out through the trachea, but just follow with me. If you can see this picture and follow the mouse, you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, this is a bird lung. You see the fresh air. This is inhalation. The bird is breathing in. So he breathes in, air comes in through the trachea and goes into the lung. So fresh air is going into the lung. And fresh air is also making this turn and going into these little air sacs. These are the rear air sacs that are being filled with fresh air as the bird is inhaling. While the air is being inhaled into the lungs, the stale air that was in the lungs is being forced out into these air sacs, these front air sacs. They are filled with what is called the stale air, that is the used air. So inhalation, air goes into the lungs and into the rear air sacs. The fresh air pushes the stale air out into these air sacs where it is held briefly. All right, that is inhalation. Now, when a bird exhales, the stale air is pushed out of these front air sacs and out through the trachea, as I mentioned earlier. So the stale air goes out this way. But here is the fun part. Look what happens back here. These rear air sacs that were holding the fresh air, they expel their air into the lungs. So fresh air moves out of the rear air sacs into the lungs. So what you have is, even on exhalation, fresh air is being put into the lungs of the bird. So when the bird inhales, fresh air goes into the lungs. When a bird exhales, fresh air is going into the lungs. Amazing. This is because the bird requires that much oxygen because of the flapping of the wings, and how much energy that expends. So he needs a constant supply of fresh oxygen. Well, this is the way God designed the bird, to make sure that there would be enough oxygen flowing through the bird at all time. He came up with, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but this is the design that God, in his wisdom, designed birds with. You have fresh air going into the lungs on inhalation. You have fresh air going into the lungs on exhalation. And the stale air is pushed out from these holding sacs out through the trachea. Totally amazing. Michael Denton, in his book, Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, in fact, he is the one from whom I first learned this, reading that book, and since have done a little bit more study on it. But Michael Denton realized this is trouble for evolution. The evolution of the bird lung is fantastically difficult to envisage. In other words, I can't picture it. There's no way. It's fantastic. That is, it's fantasy to be able to envisage, or that is, picture in my mind, the evolution of a lung. Because during the transition from the dead end type of lung that a reptile has and that we have, to the throughput type of lung that a bird has, during that transition, the respiration system must remain fully functional at all times, or the animal would die within minutes. So you have a dead end type lung, which works just fine for reptiles. You've got the throughput lung that works fine for birds. But I would like for somebody to imagine and draw on paper how it would look for this transition to take place from one type of lung to a completely different type of lung. And evolutionist Michael Denton said, I can't picture it. Fantastically difficult to envisage. One fascinating thing about this is that all birds have this type of lung, and only birds possess this type of lung. No other type of animal in God's creation has this type of lung. And this throughput type of lung is the same in all birds, no matter what their size, from tiny little hummingbirds all the way up to the 6 or 7 foot tall ostriches. They all have the throughput type of lung. It sounds to me like God had a design and he stuck with it with all birds. It works, and that's what all birds possess through his powerful creation. Michael Denton also said, the suspicion inevitably arises that perhaps no functional intermediate exists between the two types of lung. He's putting that very mildly. He says, I suspect that there is no such transition that took place between these two types of lung. And then he makes an amazing statement. He said, the avian lung, that is the bird lung and feather, which is also an amazing part of God's creation of birds, the avian lung and feather bring us very close to answering Darwin's challenge. What was Darwin's challenge? He challenged us that if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. If you can find any organ in nature that could not possibly have been formed by my natural selection theory of evolution, then my theory is going to be blown up. It's going to break down. Well, Michael Denton, evolutionist, says the avian lung is getting pretty close to answering that challenge. Bird respiration. The lung of the bird is amazing. It's an amazing part of God's creation. And this is a creature that absolutely defies evolutionary explanation. So we're going to be looking at some of these from time to time, but I wanted to start with a fun one like that. It's amazing, but it's also, it just makes us, it increases our faith. It confirms our faith in our God and His creation. So, what is evolution? Evolution is unfolding. It is change. It is development. So, evolution does occur. I do not deny, in fact, I claim that evolution does occur. We never doubted that evolution occurs. In fact, if you look up in the dictionary, it might mention that evolution is like evolving an animal from an egg. So that's one type of evolution. We also see that evolution occurs within kinds. In Genesis chapter 1, we find the word kind 10 times, and that is that these animals that God created reproduce after their kind. That's mentioned 10 times in Genesis chapter 1. So the kind, whatever the kind is, it has limits. So there can be some variation because of what we have learned about genetics. But genetics do not allow evolution to go beyond the bounds that God placed within the kinds. There are many varieties of dogs, but I believe they all evolved from one original pair of dogs, all within the dog kind. I believe there was one pair of dogs that God created in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and I believe that He put 2 dogs on the ark, and that is all. And that all the variety of dogs that we have since then that have evolved within the dog kind came from that original pair because of selective breeding, because of artificial selection as opposed to natural selection. Some of it occurred by natural selection, but so much of it is forced on dogs by humans because they want dogs to look a certain way. And we're going to talk about that some in this class. That'll be fun too. But anyway, we go on to talk about variation. Variation within kinds. Within the kinds is called microevolution, or the special theory of evolution. This is what Darwin observed, that is, scientifically, because he observed it by experimentation. And we don't deny that that kind of evolution, microevolution, occurs. Everybody knows that. That is a scientific fact because it's proven over and over and over. But what Darwin did, he took the special theory, microevolution, and he extrapolated that out to something much bigger. He claimed that the special theory applies universally, and that these trivial changes within the kinds also bring about all the complexity and diversity of life. This is the general theory of evolution. We might call it from particles to people, or from monkey to man, or from atom to atom. This is the general theory of evolution. And this is what was so radical about what Darwin wrote in his book. So let's talk about science. What science is not. Science is not naturalism. That naturalism is a belief. Naturalism is an attempt to explain the world in terms of natural processes without any need for the supernatural. So what you have is somebody believes in naturalism, they are biased. This is a biased assumption that is made before they even do any research. So in other words, instead of trying to figure out what the facts are, we start with the fact that there is no God, there is no supernatural, there is no creation. Everything happens naturally, and they start with that assumption. So therefore, the debate is over in their minds. So this is an assumption. So when someone starts with an assumption, we need to break that assumption down and get them to realize that they have made a biased assumption that is unfounded, and get them to back up and let's start over and see if there is any basis for your assumption. So that is one thing that science is not. But what science is, science comes from the Latin scientia. That's exactly how you pronounce that, by the way, which means knowledge. So the science is knowledge. According to dictionary.com, science is systematic knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation and experimentation. So evolution is not science, as we've talked about before, because you can't observe it and you can't experiment with it. And there's a lot in this book that we're studying, Unraveling Evolution, about this in chapter 3 or lesson number 3. So I do hope that you will read through the lesson and answer the question so that you can know more and more about this topic. So let's talk about Charles Darwin just for a moment. Darwin, as opposed to what you might think, he was not a radical, extreme atheist or a ruthless crusader for his beliefs. He believed in biblical creation when he was younger, but as he began thinking more about the fact that he didn't like Christianity and once again read some quotes in the book from him. He didn't like the results or the implications of creation and the Bible. His religious faith began to fade, and his belief in evolution grew because he just didn't want to believe what the Bible had to say. He said he struggled and debated with himself for 20 years before committing himself publicly to his views and writing his book. He said, "When I am dead, know that many times I have kissed and cried over this." Charles Darwin, he synthesized a theory of evolution, but he was not the first one to come up with a theory of evolution. The book tells us about several theories that came before Darwin, particularly the Lamarckian theory, Lamarck theory of evolution, stated that the variations were purposeful, that they were directed by some kind of inner drive. But where Darwin parted with Lamarck was to imply that evolution was not directed. It was totally random. It was totally naturalistic. There wasn't any kind of inner drive. It just happened on its own without any kind of agency and no drive, and completely random and naturalistic. So variation came completely, purely by chance, caused by natural selection. Now, of course, natural selection plus a tremendous amount of time. Given a great enough a length of time, practically any change, unlimited change, is possible. This was what was revolutionary about Darwin and his claim. So he was the first one who really synthesized that view, that it was totally random, that it was totally naturalistic, and that it happened by natural selection. Well, when you think about evolution and how evolutionists claim that it is based in science, when you look into it pretty deeply, and this chapter 3 of the book goes into some detail about it, we find that it is not based in science. It is based in faith. And some of the faith of some evolutionists is pretty strong and may even put our faith to shame sometimes because they are staunch, avid believers in their doctrine. On page 34, the conclusion, it asks the question in bold type there, if neo-Darwinism is dead, then is macroevolution entirely rejected? Because as I've said, we have, scientists have debunked Darwinian evolution, and neo-Darwinian evolution. So if it is dead, then is evolution dead? Macroevolution, is it entirely rejected? Well, Barry Price said this. You'll read this in the book. While evolution is a fact, how it occurs will always be the subject of debate. This is the fascination of science. To put it another way, there is not dispute about the fact that evolution has occurred, but there is dispute among scientists about how it has occurred. In other words, we know it happened, but with all the confidence that usually goes with ignorance, they said, we have no idea how it happened. So I would hate to be in that boat, saying, I know it happened. I don't know how. We don't have any proof of how it happened. We can't test it in the lab, but we know it happened. So shut up. That's basically what they're saying. And we are hit from this, from all sides with this. And I want to talk about that just for a minute. There is a constant bombardment that you, as students, will be hit with throughout your lives, especially while you're in school and while you are young. So listen closely to this, but don't listen to them, because they'll try to shake your faith in God. This is a little acronym that I studied up called GAMES, only to help us remember these aspects of society and life that hit us from every side with evolution theory. G of GAMES stands for government. You're hit with this because evolutionists are all over government. And even if somebody believes in creation or some form of creation, inevitably they will believe in millions of years. And that's very common among not only government officials, but people all over the world who say they believe in creation still believe in millions of years because they believe it is based in scientific fact, which is false. But government that holds the purse strings of the money that is taxed, they generally either believe it or purport to believe in evolution, and they have outlawed teaching of creation in schools, which brings us to the A of GAMES, academia. Academia all the way from elementary school through PhD level of university and college. It is controlled by evolutionists, especially when you get into institutions of higher learning in college and university. Academia is absolutely controlled by evolutionists, by liberals, by those who are atheists and do not believe in God. And if you think of schools as being colleges as being institutions that invite diversity of thought and invite debate. So let's get to the truth. Let's study. That's false. Don't go in there with that delusion, because it's not the case. Creation has been stamped out of most colleges and universities, and they won't allow professors who believe it to teach in their schools. So you will be hit with it throughout your life in schools. So be prepared. Build your faith now and build it strongly so that you'll be ready to give an answer to every man who asks you a reason of the hope that is in you. But do so with meekness and fear, or dignity and gentleness and respect. The M of games is media. The media, and I'm talking about particularly the news media, is full of people who believe in and teach evolution and will not allow creation thought to enter into their reports or their articles. So be aware of that. If you're watching a news report, you'll probably hear something about millions of years ago, or this is 400 million years old, or a billion years old, or whatever. It's just constant. You'll hear it all the time, but it's false. So don't let them sway you and turn away your faith in God. The E of games, entertainment. The entertainment industry is full, once again, of evolutionists. So you'll hear it in movies, see it in books, in magazines, if people read magazines anymore, but all over the internet. Evolution is there, and we are bombarded with it constantly. So just be aware of that when you're watching a movie. Have your guard up when you're listening to these things, because they will try to shake your faith in God. The S of games is science, and science and government and media. I'm sorry, science, government, and academia are all kind of intertwined together. Government has the money that they take from the people, and they give it to academia. That is, they fund research in schools, and that's where the scientists are found, by and large, is in the universities. So that's where the research is done. But then you have all three of those aspects of society, government, academia, and science, who believe in and teach and purport that evolution is true, and they will not allow creation thought to enter in. So they are controlling every aspect of this. So we are hit with a constant bombardment from every side. This little acronym, GAMES, lets you keep in your mind what aspects of life I'm talking about: the government, academia, media, entertainment, and science. All right, just a couple of quick questions. Short answer number 2 in the book: what are transitional fossils, and why is finding them so important to the evolutionists? Now, I'm not going to answer that right now. I want you to look at it. If you haven't answered that question, look on page 28 of the book, not right now, but after we conclude, and look at the Darwin quote on page 28 and answer that question. This is a very important question, and we're going to be talking about that in coming classes. One second. We're going to be talking about the transitional fossils and why they are so important to evolutionists. Also, short answer number 3. Why did Darwin's theory become so popular after his book was published? And why is it so popular today? That's on, if you'll read some quotes on page 29 in the right column. So I'm pinpointing where it is for you. You'll find the answer to those questions also. These are important questions that we're going to be talking about in some detail going forward, and that's why I bring them up now. So I urge you to take the time to look at those questions and look at the answers where I've given you the answers, page 28 and 29, and answer them so you'll be ready for our next class. Also, one more, that is the discussion question on page 37. Let's say a teacher asks a question to you if you're in college, and you say, somehow it comes out that you don't believe in evolution. They might hit you with, don't you believe it was possible for all of these varieties of dogs to come from a common ancestor? Well, your answer is going to be, well, yeah. All the varieties of dogs were, shall we say, evolved from a common ancestor. Well, then their follow-up question is going to be, well, then how can you say you don't believe in evolution? What you need to do is say, I do not accept your premise. You said that I do not believe in evolution. First of all, that's false. I do believe in evolution. Evolution within kinds, within the kinds that God created. That's how these or these varieties of dogs came about. But they are still dogs. Why isn't, you come back with the question, why aren't there any kind of transitions between dogs and some other kind? Could it be because God built limits beyond which his these varieties cannot go? And I don't know if that will shut them up or not, but at least you don't need to give in to say that, ooh, well, if there is some variety, I guess I do believe in evolution, and extrapolate that out into macroevolution like Charles Darwin did. So that concludes our class for today. Next class, we will look at lesson 6. So go ahead and jump into lesson 6. I apologize, by the way, last class I said we would jump into lesson 6 today, but we had too much to cover for the rest of chapter 3. So go on into lesson 6 this time and be ready for that next class. Appreciate your time and for joining us, and I hope these things have been helpful. If you have any questions at all, any disagreements, please don't hesitate to contact me, and let's talk about these things and come to a better understanding of God's creation and His Word. And with that, we will close, and God bless you all.